Story Corner, presented by Jennifer. Ferret in the bedroom, lizards in the fridge. Chapter 3, Stinking Little Varmint. Okay, for those of you who have not yet seen the first two videos for Ferret in the bedroom, lizards in the fridge, I suggest you go view those now, as this is a continuation of that story. Sitting on my head was one of Fred's favorite tricks. Fred was my pet ferret. I had just flopped down across my bed and opened my English book. I don't know where he'd been hiding, but no sooner did I get settled down to my homework than he leapt on me. I was lying on my stomach, and he landed on my bottom. He bounced around for a second, then scrambled up my back and perched right square on top of my head. I propped my elbows on either side of the book and rested my head in my hands. In a second, I could feel him getting a good hold of my hair with his paws. I looked up, and he looked down. "It's my homework, Fred," I told him, "and it'd be a lot easier to do if you'd get off." Fred's weasel-like face tilted from side to side, like he was studying the pages of my book. Then he leaned further out, looking down my forehead, and smiled. Daddy said that ferrets don't really smile. He says it's just the coloring of their fur and the way their mouth looks that make them seem like they're smiling. I bet there's nobody alive that knows more about animals than my daddy does. Still, lying there, looking up my forehead at that ferret, I knew he was grinning at me. "I mean it, Fred. Beat it, or I'm going to whop you." Fred just smiled again. Fred had only lived with us about 2 years. The people who owned him had taken him to the animal shelter when he was just a baby. They bought him at a pet store, then decided that a ferret was too much trouble to have around the house. The people at the shelter had tried to give him to the Oklahoma City Zoo, but they said they had so many ferrets they couldn't handle anymore. The animal shelter people then drove Fred down to Chickasaw and brought him to our house. Being a zoology teacher, Daddy is always preaching to his students about how wrong it is to keep wild animals as pets. Only when the people told Daddy that they were going to have to put Fred to sleep if he didn't take him, Daddy took Fred. That's how we got most of the animals that lived at our home. They were either animals that somebody had gotten as pets and grown tired of, or they were wild animals that some kid in the neighborhood had found. Most of the wild animals were hurt when they were brought to Daddy. We'd take care of them and nurse them back to health, Then Daddy and I would turn them loose. The other animals, the ones who didn't come from around Oklahoma, were a different story. If we turned them loose, most of them couldn't survive because Oklahoma isn't like their natural home. So the animals like Fred, who aren't native to Oklahoma or the United States, we kept. The animals did cause me a lot of problems. It seemed like my friends hardly ever wanted to come to my house. The kids at school even made fun of me because of all the animals we kept. Even Sally, my best friend, told me that my house was like a zoo. But if Daddy and I didn't take the animals in and give them a place to live, well... Fred reached out with a paw and put it on my nose. He leaned further out, like he was studying my English assignment. I mean it, Fred, if you don't get off of me by the time I count 3, I'm going to clobber you. Fred just sat there. 1. When I raised my chin off my head, Fred took his paw off my nose and stood off my hands. Fred took his paw off my nose and stood on my head. 2. I reached down and got hold of my English book. Fred bounced up and down in my hair. All right, you're asking for it. 3! Quick as I could, I yanked the book off the bed, lifted it up, and brought it down on Fred. As usual, Fred was way too quick for me. He moved, and I clunked myself on the head. He raced down my back, across my bottom, and down my left leg, and jumped to the floor. I'd never hit Fred. Not really. But swatting at him with a book was a good way to get rid of him so I could get my homework done. He'd be back, though. It was a game we played. Usually, after I whopped him with one of my textbooks, he'd take off. After a few minutes, he'd come back and leap on me again. Then he'd go racing around the mattress while I yelled and tried to thump him with my pencil. That's when he'd take off and let me finish my lessons. Only Fred didn't come back. I didn't even notice until I finished my assignment and stuck my homework paper back inside my book. I sat up and looked around. Fred? Then I saw him. He was over in the corner where I dumped my gym clothes. He was flopping around, rubbing first one side of his body, then the other on my socks. I'd seen Fred act like this once before when Daddy and I had taken him for a walk. He found something dead and rolled in it and smelled so bad Mama wouldn't let him back in the house until Daddy and I gave him a bath. He was rolling on my gym socks, just like that. Fred! I shrieked. My socks aren't dead. You get off them. Fred just kept rolling. I grabbed the pillow from my bed and threw it. I was really shocked and upset that Fred would treat my gym socks like something rotten he'd found in the woods. So I threw the pillow a little harder than I intended. It thunked him good, landing right on top of him and smushing him into the corner. For a second, I was afraid I might have hurt him. Then he came slinking out from under it. He was long and skinny, like all ferrets, but as soon as he got out from under the pillow, he arched his back and drew up into a ball. Then he started bouncing up and down and chattering at me. Finally, he stretched out and went racing around my dresser about 3 times before tearing out into the hall. I smiled, knowing he was all right. Then I put my English book away and stuck my pillow back on the bed. Better get this stuff washed, I told myself. Only I didn't have time. Mama was squealing and yelling from the kitchen. Liz, get in here and get this darn ferret off the table. I could tell from the sound of her voice that Fred was just about to get himself in real trouble. I raced down the hall. When I got to the kitchen, Fred was under the table, jumping from one chair to the next, while Mama popped at him with her dish towel. Stinking little varmint, she growled, still trying to get a good swat at him. just got supper on the table, and he comes tearing in and jumps right in the middle of the spaghetti. If I get my hands on you, Fred. I managed to get Fred before Mama did. When I got hold of him, he was breathing real hard and trembling. I'll lock him in the laundry room, I said, racing off down the hall. Behind me, I could hear Mama muttering to herself, turtle poop on the floor, ferrets in the spaghetti. If you and your dad keep dragging stuff home, I'm going to go nuts. Mama had calmed down by the time we finished supper. I knew she was still upset, though, so I offered to help with the dishes. No, I'll do them, Mama said. Your dad called from Norman. He's going to have to work late. He and Dr. Benson have to edit that lizard film they've been working on. He wants you to feed the animals. I felt my lip curl. Even the lizards? Mama nodded. Especially the lizards. I absolutely hated feeding the lizards. Daddy's lizards lived on the sun porch at the front of our house. We kept it warm and full of green plants, just like a greenhouse. And the thing was crawling with lizards. All kinds and shapes and sizes of lizards. Only it wasn't the lizards I minded. It was what the lizards ate that gave me the creepy crawlies. We had a big backyard with 2 sheds that Daddy built. The first one had the hay in it for Ivan. Ivan was an ibex that one of Daddy's friends from Saudi Arabia had sent him. He looked like a big goat, only his horns were huge and had knobby lumps on them. Daddy always said that Ivan was the best watchdog anyone could ever want. If anything or anyone came in our backyard, Ivan would lower those huge horns and go after them. He kept prowlers out. He kept the McGrewer's dogs from sneaking under the fence to go to the bathroom in our backyard, and he got the gas meter man one time. Daddy had to rescue him. The shed also housed the lawnmower and all the cages and collecting stuff Daddy used on field trips and expeditions. Next to that shed was Bessie's pen. Bessie was our red-tailed hawk. We found her beside the road when we were driving to Oklahoma City to see a show one evening. Daddy said that she had probably been hit by a car. He said that happened a lot to owls and hawks. They'd be making their dive at a field mouse or rabbit, and it would run across the road, causing the owl or hawk to fly smack dab into the side of a car. When we found her, her right wing was all twisted around. Daddy took her home and tried his best to fix it, but it was broken so badly it never did heal right. Bessie couldn't fly a lick. The second shed was smaller than the first, but that's where we kept the mice and the crickets. We raised the mice for Fred. Like most ferrets, he fancied himself the world's greatest hunter. He didn't mind rolling in something that smelled dead, but he much rather catch something alive when it came to mealtime. The crickets were for Daddy's lizards. They came in big boxes from a company in Mississippi. Daddy had a huge screen box that he put them in. When it came time to feed the lizards, you had to reach in and herd the crickets into a small metal box. Then you'd carry the box to the lizards on the sun porch. When you were herding the crickets, they jumped on your arms and your hands, and you had to keep scraping them off. To me, it was the worst thing in the world, having a bunch of creepy crawly crickets climbing on my arm. I'll make a deal with you, Mama, I said. I'll feed all the animals and do the dishes if you feed the lizards. Mama shook her head. Then she stopped with a smile. Tell you what, she answered, I'll do the dishes and feed the lizards if you feed everything else and mop the kitchen floor. I nodded so quickly I almost gave myself a headache. You've got a deal. I ran to the laundry room to get the mop. Fred was ready to come out and play, but I managed to shove him back with my foot and close the door. When I got back to the kitchen, Mama was already letting the dishwater drain out. She had the cabinet door open and was watching the drain that she'd been fixing. guess I finally got that pesky thing fixed." She smiled. "I'll run you some mop water. When you finish mopping, watch that drain and make sure it isn't leaking again." I nodded. While Mama was fixing the mop water, I went to the kitchen door and took the board out. Daddy had put a board down at the bottom of the door jamb. It was short enough for everyone else to step over, but tall enough so Josh and Mr. T couldn't get over it and crawl from the kitchen into the rest of the house. Josh and Mr. T were our turtles. Josh was really a desert terrapin from Arizona. One of Daddy's friends, who was now a game ranger, had sent him. Mr. T, his real name was Mr. Turtle, but we called him Mr. T for short, was a mud turtle. One of the neighborhood kids had found him all wrapped up in some fishing line. His back leg was almost cut off and he couldn't swim, so Daddy had kept him. I just finished mopping when the doorbell rang. Mama called from the front door that Sally and Tina Simmons were here. I wrung out the mop out and put it back on the back porch to dry. Then I trotted off through the house to let them in. I never even thought about putting the board back in the doorway so the turtles couldn't get out. I never thought about it until it was too late.